Research Cafe, proudly brought to you by Innovation and Ideation Club of Tripoli. In this vibrant series, we gather forward-thinking researchers, experts to explore the scientific research, whether you are an aspiring innovator or simply someone with a keen interest in the research. This series will definitely help you because it is designed in such a way to inspire, inform, to ignite your passion for discovery. So let's embark on this journey of discovery together, Research Cafe, where curiosity meets knowledge. So I'm your host, Nirmala, and today we are honored to have our esteemed guest, Dr. Anita and Sunny Ma'am, a board-certified pharmacotherapy specialist and clinical pharmacist in Kovai Medical Center and Hospital, Coimbatore. We welcome you, ma'am.
Welcome. Thank you for considering me for this program too.
Shall we start with the Q&A session, ma'am?
Yeah, we'll proceed.
Before that, we want to give a small intro about you, ma'am. Shall we?
Yeah, sure.
So, ma'am has completed Doctor of Pharmacy in the year 2016 from the PhD College of Pharmacy, Coimbatore, and also received American Board of Pharmacy Specialist certification in pharmacotherapy, and became a board-certified pharmacotherapy specialist. During her academics, with all her excellence and efforts, ma'am has received Best Outgoing Student Award and Best Clinical Performance Award, and also ma'am got selected as intern in Student Exchange Program, did 2-month internship at Toledo, Ohio, USA, and experienced the international internship. Throughout her journey, ma'am has worked on and published various research projects and has also 6 years experience in the neurology department. She shared and delivered her knowledge, insights as a speaker in numerous events. So, please join with me in welcoming ma'am. So, welcome you, ma'am. So, shall we start Q&A session now?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll proceed.
So, let's start the Q&A session with personal journey, ma'am. So, here, will you please share us that what motivated you to specialize in pharmacotherapy and specifically in the field of neurology?
Regarding pharmacotherapy, while doing my PharmD, that was my favorite subject, and I think that subject motivated me to learn and understand the theoretical aspects so that I wanted to do better in my practical approach for the patient care. So first year was just kind of learning some subjects, getting pass marks just to move on to the second year. But when I entered the second year, when we started learning pharmacotherapy, that made me understand, okay, there is something that you need to focus on and something which was interesting. So learning the pathogenesis, pathophysiology, and then pharmacology. And pharmacotherapy was the one which connected all these dots. So that one subject inspired me a lot to do more, to learn more, and come to the clinical side. And while doing my fifth year, I started researching about what all career opportunities were there for PharmD, and I was more focused on what to do regarding the higher studies too. Is there any opportunity for that? And then I came to know about the pharmacotherapy residency, which was done in USA. So they had multiple specialties for doing this residency, and I was caught up with this pharmacotherapy because the curriculum and the subjects involved in pharmacotherapy was really interesting. So that time itself, I had a dream of doing residency in pharmacotherapy. And while doing my internship in sixth year, as you mentioned, I had an opportunity to go to USA. And those 2 months gave me time to interact with the pharmacotherapy residents and people who had completed the residency and were practicing as clinical pharmacists. So they were running their own clinics, they were taking care of patients, and they were consulting the patients independently. So all this motivated me to stay in the field of pharmacotherapy. And during practicing in neurology, when I came to know that I am eligible for this particular examination just with the Indian clinical experience, again I landed up in pharmacotherapy specialty because that was the best one for me, especially because there was no neurology specialty. And I noticed that I had a big knowledge gap and a big gap in my practice where I found it difficult difficulty in treating my patients when they came up with too many comorbidities. So I knew the best answer for this particular issue was taking up this pharmacotherapy exam, and that helped me. That is helping me to stay focused on my patient care. And I always my favorite subject and my favorite topic will be pharmacotherapy. Regarding neurology, that was not my option, not even my last option. I was given that specialty even though I was not even interested in doing or continuing in the neurology. By the time I started working, my doctors were really helping, supporting, and motivating me to learn. They taught me a lot, and I understood there is more to do in neurology. When I joined, I thought it's just some aspirin, some clopidogrel, and some statin. That's all in neurology. But once I started seeing more and more tough and complicated cases, I understood okay, there is more for a clinical pharmacist to do in this neurology department. So that motivated me to stay in neurology, and I'm continuing to work in neurology department.
Truly amazing, ma'am. The way you evolved from the student to research, getting certification in the board, and becoming a pharmacotherapy specialist is truly amazing. You stand yourself as your motivation by aiming at your goal. And we recently heard about that you had shared a story of 75 elderly gentleman suffering from myasthenia crisis, whom you motivated and given emotional support, which gave him the hope of life. So we want to know the entire story of it, ma'am. How you motivated him, how that story. We want entire story, ma'am. Could you please share it with us?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. That gentleman, when he entered the emergency department, we were called in for neurology consultation because he had generalized weakness. And after the initial evaluation, they understood it's a neurological issue. And he was suspected to have myasthenia gravis at the time of admission. So I was the first person to see the patient from our unit. So when he was so tired and he had ptosis, which is almost kind of partial closure of the eyes. So he could barely see me. He was so tired that he couldn't even talk. So I went and I got the history from the caregivers, and they were all standing there with so much hope, asking me whether he'll come back, whether we'll be able to save him or not. So our focus was mainly on diagnosing and to confirm the diagnosis so that we can initiate the therapy. So after going through all the details, I assured them that with the available therapy, we'll be able to revert all these symptoms and he'll be healthy enough to go home soon. That was the first statement I told them. And we started treating him. I had a suspicion of beta blocker induced worsening of this particular situation because he was recently initiated on nebivolol. So I just kept that in mind. Maybe that initiated this trigger. So as we continued his treatment, he had too many events during hospitalization. He had a respiratory failure. He had to undergo ventilation. And after ventilation, we put him on a tracheostomy too. So of course, that will cause him a difficulty in talking. He won't be able to speak out. So all the time, whenever I asked him something, he always gave me the action telling, yes, I am fine. Or if he was having some trouble, he used to communicate using actions and some lip movements, and it was going on smoothly. So luckily we were able to bring him to a step down ICU. But during the treatment at the step down ICU, he had a coronary event and that complicated the whole issue. So since he required a beta blocker at that time, they put him on a mild beta blocker. But due to too many issues like infection, any acute event can worsen the myasthenia symptoms. So too many issues at a time, and he started developing new complications of myasthenia. And then I was like, okay, we'll take out all the medicines which we are suspecting to cause myasthenia. So only thing I could do for him was to talk to him. Medication part we were doing on one side, but he was not in a position to hear about what all we were doing, like what medicine we were giving, how it is going to act, and what adverse events it is going to cause. There was no meaning in talking all this unnecessary thing at that point of time. So all I did was I went and I spoke to him and I told him like, okay, you're having some issues, but we are trying to get you out of the situation. So you'll be fine soon. and we'll send you home healthy. That was the only thing I used to tell him repeatedly. And every time he gave me a thumbs up. So that kind of motivated me, because the patient with the tracheostomy tube and too many lines in his body, he couldn't even move because of the quadriparesis. All four limbs were weak, and even his eyes were partially closed. And with whatever energy he had, he just gave me a thumbs up, telling, "Okay, I'll be fine." So daily, what I did was I just spent some time with him talking. I repeated the same thing, and after a long hospitalization, he recovered well, and we sent him home walking. So I was like, fine, okay, at least we got the patient alive and not a disabling outcome. So at least he could walk himself. So that was a really good result for that particular patient. While coming for review, unexpectedly, he had a conversation with my doctor when I was not there. So he just mentioned about me telling my words, my communication with him during the ICU stay, that gave him a lot of hope, and it motivated him to stay positive. So the exact words he mentioned was, "I knew I would come out of this because she told me I'll be fine and she'll send me home soon healthy." So that positive attitude from the patient side was actually inspiring me. But when he told, after all the treatment, after giving too many complicated treatments and ventilator support and ICU stay, all he could say was, "Those words helped me to stay positive, and that's why I came out and now I am healthy." That was really surprising. It's not the first time, but since this patient had undergone too many complications, and 2-3 times I felt like I'm going to lose this patient. So after all this issue, when he came out and when he gave me this feedback, when he spoke to my doctor regarding this, it was really, what to tell, it was a good feeling. And even now when the patient is coming for review, he just makes sure that he meets me. Even if I'm in rounds, he just conveys to my doctor that he wants to see me, and their caregivers also, both the daughter, the son and wife, they always, whenever they see me, they are so happy, and they always have some tears in their eyes. I don't know why they are still sad. Maybe I don't know, maybe they're thanking. But whenever I see them, I always remember, or I always remind me that we should continue communicating to the patient, even if there is no hope, even if we feel like we are losing the patient. Better that we give the patient some positive hope, so that we don't know, miracle happened, and unless the body and mind is in a positive attitude, they won't recover well. So keep good communication and rapport with your patient. That's what I'm trying to do. And the best example was this one, so I thought of sharing it in LinkedIn. Thank you for bringing this up for this discussion.
Yeah, ma'am, you are truly an inspiration to the youngsters, and the entire story tells that how care and compassionate and empathetic you are. So moving to another question, that were there any significant challenges you faced during your educational and professional path, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, education. Why I chose PharmD was not because I knew everything about PharmD and the scope and whatever work I'm going to do. So after the first year, as I mentioned, pharmacotherapy motivated me to stay positive and learn more and feel interested in those subjects. During that time, as you all know, the subjects were tough, and I had too many books for reading. More than passing the exam, my point was to understand what is happening inside our body. So, to make it interesting, I had to do so much of reading, and I always had some questions, and I had people who helped me to get answers. The PharmD studying time was really tough. Challenges were too many that what I did was I started going for part-time work in pharmacy, which helped me to learn the molecule name. The generic names became so familiar because I was continuously seeing medications, I was dispensing the medication. So my friends, when they were struggling to memorize the medication name, I remember writing the exams easily because I was exposed too many times in pharmacy, and memorizing those pharmacological issues were overcome by my part-time work. And during my part-time, working time, I had my teachers also coming for part time in between for short periods of time. So they also made sure that I utilized that time. It was not just a work or taking medicine and dispensing, but they used to teach me what each medication was and what side effects you could face, and when while dispensing, what you should convey to the patient. So this happened during my second year. Until sixth year I was doing my part time. So after each year I was learning new medication, and whenever I dispensed I started counseling my patients too. So I improved my patient counseling also during that time, and slowly I knew, okay, patient side work will be much better for me than going into non-clinical side. So that evolution happened during the PharmD uh, studying time. And by the time I reached sixth year, I was not sure about where to go or what to do, where to start my career. But when I retrospectively thinking, I think the part-time work helped me a lot rather than learning more of theory. The working atmosphere and the working experience which I gained throughout my farm day time helped me a lot. So there were challenges, but maybe I had answers for each challenge. So I don't really feel like now I don't feel like I struggled a lot. Maybe I had good support system during all those times, including my teachers, my principal. They all supported me indirectly, which all I came to know after I passed out from my college. So knowing their support and how they wanted me to do well and clinical practice, altogether it was a good experience. Even though there were struggles, God gave me answers, and I had opportunity to overcome those challenges. Specifically telling will be difficult, but a combination of those practical sessions and theoretical part was really good.
The way you tackled the issue was really amazing, ma'am. That I'm hoping that every student should tackle the situation like you to overcome their issues and challenges. Ma'am, could you share that your experience as a student in the PhD College of Pharmacy, where you learned the valuable lessons and you learned during the PharmD program? Could you please some lessons regarding PhD College of Pharmacy and the way you learned the lessons there? Could you please list out them, ma'am?
The main advantage of PhD College of Pharmacy is that we were welcomed by all the doctors, even when we started our clinical rotation, starting from second year, third year, fourth year. So whenever we had an opportunity to be inside the hospital, they all uh, they all were accepting us. They were trying to teach us. They were motivating us, and our staffs were also supporting us to be along with the patients, to be more exposed to the patient care rather than reading the theory alone. They made sure that we had good practical exposure. That helped us a lot to understand how our theoretical knowledge can be applied to the patient care. So each year, when we had this clinical rotation, our staffs made sure that we were prepared enough to go to the bedside, and they communicated to the doctors how we were struggling in our theoretical aspects, and doctors were really supporting us to understand how to take care of a patient, how to approach a patient, and they helped us in doing the clinical examination. Even though we didn't have any official classes, whenever we went for postings and during our clinical rotation, they were trying to explain how they were taking care of the patient, and as a PharmD, what you people can contribute, how to take care of the medication, how to bridge the gap that they were having. Many of the physicians understood they were not able to take care of the medication as expected. So they were so kind enough to give us those responsibility, and we were exposed to the patient care much early than we were expected to do so. So whenever we had the clinical case presentations, we had a lot to discuss because our doctors were helping us to learn, identify the issues, and they were giving us answers. And of course, we presented all those during our case presentation. So whoever didn't get this opportunity, we were trying to share it with our friends. And we all had a good rapport within the batch, with our staff, with the doctors, and patient also were really welcoming us for learning. They were not like, your students and please don't come near me, please don't disturb me. Those kind of attitudes were not seen with our patient, because the doctor was welcoming. Patient also felt like, okay, fine, these people are here to take care of them. So they also gave us the opportunity to learn. So the clinical exposure was really good and amazing. And I have seen in many colleges that they are not getting adequate clinical exposure. Compared to that, PhD college is providing a wonderful experience.
It was wonderful, ma'am. So, ma'am, could you share your happiness and experience that you had in the year 2016 where you were awarded with the Best Outgoing Students and also Best Clinical Performance Award? We want to know that experience of yours, ma'am.
Thanks to my staff and my principal, they chose me. They gave me these two awards. Previously, only one award will be given to a person. They made sure that two awards or multiple awards were not given to the same person. So when my batch came for the graduation, they had criteria for giving the award for each and every category. So there were multiple awards like Best Outgoing Student, Clinical Excellence, Best Sports Person, Best Cultural Person, in the sense the person who is more involved in cultural activities, and the person with good academic performance. So for each they had a criteria and they were adding on points for that. And I was selected first for the Clinical Excellence Awards because my interest in clinical was too much that my case presentations were so interesting, and without much competition, I used to present and submit reports regarding my patients. So I had too many documents and data that they were happy enough to give me the Clinical Excellence Award. But the Best Outgoing Student was not announced till the last day. So I didn't expect that I'll be getting it, because already I was given this Clinical Excellence Award information. Last day when they announced, I was like, ma'am, I have been given one award already. So I was asking, how will it be possible to give two awards to the same person? So they were like, okay, they had the criteria, and since I was fitting into that criteria, they didn't want to change the decision just because I was given another award. And I was so happy to see that my batchmates were also supportive of this decision. They were congratulating me, telling that you deserved it, and that was really a happy moment. I didn't expect that all of my people will be so supportive, and I never knew that. I was not expecting it. They were also not expecting it. But when the award was announced, they were so happy for me, and I knew they were so supporting, and I couldn't believe that my staffs were also so happy to give these two awards for me. I really thank my colleagues, my friends, and my staff for giving this opportunity, because these awards have given me good recognition in the college while pursuing my career and while I have been looking for more opportunities. Of course, these two awards gave me a lot of recognition. So it was such a beautiful moment when I came to know, and my parents were also really happy. Something which you were not expecting, and then suddenly you're getting these two, and all of them were supporting for this too. So that was really a wonderful moment for me.
It's truly amazing, ma'am, your journey, your experience. Thank you for sharing with us. Ma'am, could you share that after completing your PharmD, what were your initial career goals and how they evolved over time?
So when I was completing my PharmD, only thing I knew was I wanted to work in the clinical side. So let it be a hospital as a clinical pharmacist, or whether I go to the industrial side, I wanted to make sure that I was working with the patients. So during my 6th year, I had a real confusion regarding should I go to a clinical trial part or come back to the hospital and work as a clinical pharmacist. So I had a doctor to whom I used to discuss this continuously, and he gave me some idea regarding how the work will be different if I am working in a hospital setting, and how different it will be if I am working in a clinical trial setup. So then, after getting all the details, I decided, okay, fine, I'll go for the clinical pharmacy role, because whatever I learned, I wanted to apply, and I wanted to learn more too. So only if I was dealing with patients who had challenges in their treatment, I'll be curious enough to update myself so that I can learn more and more. So for this particular reason and my interest, my passion for taking care of patients, I chose to become a clinical pharmacist, and then I landed up in neurology. After 3 years experience, I wanted to do more. I was trying to see something to specialize in neurology or a subspecialty in neurology like epilepsy. I started looking for courses and something to add on my knowledge, to improve my knowledge so that I can improve my patient care. That's when my colleague told me about this board certification, and then after going through the details, I selected pharmacotherapy specialty, and then I thought, okay, fine. My dream of doing this pharmacotherapy residency, due to some personal issues, I couldn't do that. So I thought of learning more by taking up this exam. And 3 years of preparation, I just tried equating it to the residency that I do in USA. It's 2 years actually there. So with 3 years of preparation, I was able to pass this exam, and I learned a lot. And whatever I wanted to do to update myself to improve my patient care, I received it from this particular examination. It was a wonderful experience, and so now I think I should be focusing more on neurology. So I am trying to improve my knowledge in neurological diseases rather than focusing more on non-neurological aspect. So from pharmacotherapy, now I'm just focusing on my neurology and subspecialties in neurology like stroke and epilepsy.
Thank you, ma'am. You have been an invited speaker at many prestigious events. Can you share your memorable experience from one of those events, ma'am?
Yeah, 1 year ago I was invited to a college at Kerala. So we 3 speakers were there for that particular day, and the order of the events were like how the medicines are being manufactured and how you study about the medication. That's about doing the research. And the third speaker, I was the third speaker, and I was given the topic of clinical pharmacy in neurology. So that particular order, they didn't plan it. They just put the order based on the people coming from distant. So I was given the last opportunity, but when you look into that order of the speakers or the topics what they presented, it was like the medicine is being manufactured, and then you are doing a research on the medicine, and then I was talking more about the practical application of it. So when I spoke, I was telling the delegates about how we should use the medications properly. After so much of research and too many, what to tell, the drug processing, the manufacturing process is a big kind of 12-year process going on. After all the clinical trials, they are giving us a medication, they are giving us the indication, they are telling us what dose to be given. They have been looking to the kinetic and the dynamic data, and unless we use it properly, unless we use it ethically, we are not going to give the medication to the patient in a proper way. The patients won't be in a position to utilize it well. So I was telling them about how judiciously we should be using the medication, and that needs to be done only if we know the medication in and out. So after all this research, they are not asking us to memorize each and every point, but at least whatever is necessary, like the main pharmacological aspects, including what are the contraindications, whether it is safe in renal or hepatic, how the medicine is going to act inside the body, how we should monitor the patient. All these things, all these aspects have been looked into with a long 12 years clinical trial. And once they give us the data, we should feel the responsibility to use the medications properly. Even though I didn't go with this particular idea, after those 2 speakers uh, gave their talk, I was feeling more responsible for giving the patient care. And as we are working in the field of pharmacy, we are going to be more responsible, because after the diagnosis, it's all about the treatment, and the treatment is going to take care of the patient. So actually, we are playing with the lives of the patient. If we don't take it responsibly, if we don't do it properly, then patient is going to suffer, and it means that we have not done our job ethically. So I was able to convey this particular aspect to the students there, and I think among all the talks I gave, the practical application was well conveyed during that particular conference.
Thank you for sharing your personal journey with us, ma'am. So, and we are moving into second segment that's about the BCPS, and I hope all of you are noting down the points. And the first question here is, can you provide an overview of the BCPS certification, including its requirements and the benefits of obtaining it, ma'am? So we want to know completely about that certification and exam and all things, ma'am. Please share with us, ma'am.
Okay, I'll make it very brief. Basically, you need to have a minimum of 3 years of clinical experience after getting your license. So, after the registration, from that date, you should calculate your clinical experience. And if you have 3 years experience, you are eligible to take up this pharmacotherapy specialty examination. So once you plan to take this exam, you need to submit all your documents. They'll ask for the soft copy and some hard copy from the university or the college. So once you send it and they approve your application, you can take a date for the examination, and after good preparation, you can attempt the exam. So preparing for this particular examination is going to be exhausting because pharmacotherapy includes all the diseases. It's like doing a DM in general medicine or an MD in general medicine. You have to go through all the medication starting from your brain to the toe, all the department, all the specialties. Let it be neurology, oncology, ophthalmology, all the common and the uncommon and the subspecialties. You should be having good knowledge. So going through, it's like swimming an ocean and don't know where to start and where to end. So it's going to be really tough. But whatever we have learned from DIPRO, it's basically the pharmacotherapy subjects or the pharmacotherapy diseases which you have studied during your second and third year in PharmD. You need to brush up those basics, and you need to know what the updated guidelines, what are the new recommendations, and as per the guideline, how you are going to treat the patient. That's what basically they are going to assess you in this exam. So you should be knowing the pathogenesis, pathophysiology of the disease. You should be knowing the pharmacology of all the medications. And for pharmacotherapy, you will be applying the recent guidelines, the American guidelines. Since it's an American exam, they always follow the American guidelines. And based on that guidelines, the question will be like what medicine you will be preferring for this patient. So you should be knowing the first line medication, second line, as well as the third line medicine. And if the patient is having some contraindication to the first line, you should be going with the second line medicine, right? So unless you know all these aspects, the guideline recommendation as well as the pharmacology, and choosing the best therapy for the patient. That's all. To make it simple, that's all about pharmacotherapy or the BCPS exam. But going through each and every disease and all this guideline, treatment recommendation, all the medications, memorizing the pharmacology, knowing the medications, drug interaction, renal dose adjustment, hepatic dose adjustment, contraindication, monitoring parameters, when to follow up the patient, when to repeat a blood investigation, what non-pharmacological treatment you can provide for the patient, what are the ethical considerations, how you are going to communicate the problem with another healthcare professional, what type of teaching method you will use for teaching your colleagues or healthcare professional or your students, or how you are going to make sure your patient is adherent to the medication, how will you cross-check it, how you are going to do the literature evaluation, the evidence-based medicine, understanding it and applying it to the patient care. All these aspects will be tested in the pharmacotherapy specialty. I really enjoyed learning it, and just be prepared mentally and give enough time for yourself to prepare for this exam. And once you finish reading one round, you'll understand, okay, you have gone through it and you won't be remembering anything. So multiple revision is required before you go for this particular exam. And trust me, preparing for this exam is going to change your perspective. After completing 3 years of preparation and passing this exam, my practice has changed a lot. I have had good improvement in my patient care, and I have been better in my minute aspects actually. For example, what I told, the patient communication, explaining about the medication, all those things have changed. I was doing it basically, but I improved my techniques, I improved my approach to the patient. So you'll have a different angle, different perspective in what you are doing, and you will know how to improve it once you start or complete your preparation. So if anyone is planning to do, it's good. just make sure that you give enough time for the preparation.
It was amazing, ma'am. Ma'am, how did you balance your work and study time during the preparation for BCPS exam, ma'am?
Don't ask me, my God. I don't even want to speak about it because it was really tough. My duty was not something time bound, so I had to leave at 8 or 9 based on the caseload, and most of the days I'll be coming back at 8 or 9 again. So it's like a 10 to 12 hour duty, and by the time you come back, you'll be so tired that you won't be in a position to read anything or memorize anything. So in between, I had to find some time by getting up early, and by 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, I used to try to wake up, but again, because of the hectic work and the tiredness, it was not that easy. So I tried getting my weekend timing, and somehow I gave the first attempt. I got good marks, but it was not enough to pass the exam, and just for few marks, I lost the first attempt, and then again second time I went through the same, and I failed the second time also. Then third time I thought of giving a different approach, and I bought this HYMR results for the preparation. So it's like high yield med review, which gives a very comprehensive outlook on each and every disease. So after the two attempts, I understood that my basics was not strong, and I had too many areas to be covered, too many weaknesses in multiple specialties. So to cover that, I bought a new preparation material, and the third attempt, I tried working hard. Compared to the first two attempts, I started from the beginning. I started as if I had not studied anything. And that HYMR resource gave me a good knowledge actually. The teaching was so nice that I felt like I restarted my PharmD. So starting from the anatomy, physiology, again the pathophysiology, pharmacology, then the pharmacotherapy. His classes were really good. Dr. Anthony Baste was taking those classes, and it was so amazing. And it's like you'll be more curious to know what next. So every day, morning 4 o'clock, I used to wake up even before my alarm went off because I was so inspired to see and listen his lecture. So from 4 to 9, I'll spend time reading. So continuously 5 hours. I was not even aware time was flying because it was so interesting, and I was enjoying my study time during my third attempt. Even though I was mentally it was very tough for me to prepare for a third attempt after failing for the first two times. So gaining confidence and motivating myself itself drained a lot of energy. And once I started preparing the third time, I felt like, okay, fine, we'll give it a try. If not, again, we'll think about the fourth time. That was the mental state at that time. So after the third time preparation and attempting the exam, I felt like, okay, fine. Even if you don't pass this exam, you have learned a lot. That was my reason to be positive. I learned a lot, I improved a lot, and I knew that my care was changing. My patient care was changing a lot. So when the exam result came, I passed. That was really good. But even if I had failed, I would not be so sad because I knew how much I learned from my third attempt. So it was really tough time during my first two attempts as well as third attempt, and I had to work hard to pass the third time. But giving a different approach during my third attempt was also good. So instead of sticking on to the same study pattern, I made so many changes, and I started whatever I learned during the morning time. Next, when I came for my work, I started applying it in my patient. So when I did patient counseling, I tried recollecting the contraindications and side effects of each medication. So step by step, patient by patient, I utilized my time to prepare for the exam too. So focused preparation from 4 to 9, and application of whatever I learned from morning 10 to night 10 was happening during I think for around 5 to 6 months. It was a nice time.
It was really tough, ma'am, to balance both and work and the student life, but you managed it very well. Truly inspirational. So, ma'am, we want to know what advantages has the BCPS certification provided in your career, and in what ways has it opened new opportunities for you?
Okay, so after this particular certification, as I mentioned, the major advantage or the major change is the change in your practice, the approach to your patient, and the clinical pharmacy services you provide. You'll understand that you have grown, and you'll see that you have stepped up a bit, your standards have gone a bit higher. So you'll notice that change as soon as you start preparing for the exam itself. More than that, you'll get more recognition because you have learned more and you have been given a board certification by American Board of Pharmacy Specialty. So it's like a quality indicator. Once you have this board certification, it means that an organization, a body has accredited or they have recognized your work and your knowledge has been identified as a quality thing. So that recognition will help you project yourself in many aspects, in your practice, in your academics, and in your profession too. So after the certification, my clinical pharmacy designation was promoted to pharmacotherapy specialist, and that particular designation is motivating me. So because people are asking me what else you are doing, isn't it the same like a clinical pharmacist? Basically, it's the same. It's like you're providing the clinical pharmacy services, but of course you are doing something additional than what you are doing previously. So this change of your designation, change of your practice, improving your knowledge, and helping you to share this knowledge, doing more academics, and of course these invitations and opportunities to become a speaker and sharing your knowledge on how you have changed from one position to another. All these are, of course, advantages of board certification. And it all depends on how you want to perceive it, how you want to take it to the next level. Just getting a board certification alone is not going to help you, but you need to put in more effort to make sure that you are doing better than what you were doing before you got this board certification. So partially it's your side, partially it's all the board certification which is doing the work.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing. Ma'am, what advice would you give to pharmacy students or pharmacists considering pursuing BCPS certification?
Yeah, I'll encourage you all people to do the board certification at least for the learning purpose. Even if you are not getting any further advantages or even if you are not able to satisfy your expectation, whatever you learn is going to help you a lot. So, people who are planning to prepare, if you have not completed your 3 years of clinical experience, no worries. You can restart reading the Dipiro pharmacotherapy book. So whatever in Dipiro, that's the same thing you're going to see in BCPS exam also. Only thing the mode of preparation and more working on MCQs is required in addition to what you see in Dipiro. So if you are in your first or second or third year of your career, just start reading the simple or common diseases from Dipiro or even the Kodak Kimball. If you have gone through this particular book, it's an applied therapeutics book. It has wonderful case study presentations, which is kind of similar to the BCPS questions. So if you have the opportunity to tune your mind to these MCQs, it will help you a lot while preparing for this particular exam. Just learning the theory alone is not going to help you, but you should have that application mind. That's why they prefer people with 3 years of clinical experience, because all these questions are going to be like you're standing in front of a patient. You'll feel like you're in a real life situation and you have 3 or 4 options and you need to choose the best out of it. Even if you have 4 options, 3 out of them will be right answer. So out of the 3, you need to choose the best one, and that's a tricky area. So for that, you need to have good experience. You need to learn a lot. You need to understand all the medications in and out, so you know when to choose, what to choose, and how to choose. So that's all about PCPS. If you want a simple thing for the exam purpose, this is what you'll be tested for. They're examining your clinical knowledge. That's all.
Thank you for sharing all your experiences with us, ma'am, regarding the BCPS certification and the pathway. So let's dive into the arena of research to life navigating the world of research. What are your thoughts on the ethical consideration involved in the neurology research, and how can researchers institute their work upholds ethical standards, ma'am?
In neurology, the ethical issues are going to be mainly in the outcome part. So when we decide to do a study or when we want to do a research, the one of the main focus will be on the outcome. So whether we bring in a positive outcome or not, we should always be worried about the negative outcome. So in neurology, most of the time, what we end up is more than a situation of life-threatening condition, we end up in giving or providing disability to the patient. So the side effects, more than the side effects, if the disease is not getting treated well, the patient may end up with a very bad disability like weakness of a limb or some vision disturbance, which is going to affect their quality of life. So unless we have a good knowledge or unless we are able to convince the patient regarding these particular aspects, without mentioning all these negative outcomes, it's going to be a tough situation for us to proceed with. Yes.
Ma'am, what advice would you give to aspiring pharmacotherapists and neurologists who are enthusiastic to start their journey in the field of neurology, ma'am?
All the people who are planning to come into clinical pharmacy services, make sure that you are providing a clinical service. Clinical means it should be with the patient. So unless you are having a good rapport or good communication with the patient, your services are not going to be valid. Because if you really want your service to reach the patient, you need to convey that to our patients. For that, you need to communicate with them. So having good empathy, being very friendly with the patient, make sure that the patient is providing you all the details. For that, you need to build the patient should feel confident enough to share their details with you. It could be the personal issues, it could be something related to the medication, but unless they feel it's safe and good enough to give you the detail, they are not going to share it with you. And trust me, spending more time with the patient is going to help you improve your patient care. So if you are not willing to be with the patient, better to avoid clinical pharmacy services.
I hope everyone got the point. So we are into another interesting segment, that's innovative research projects from idea to implementation. So here is the first question. Your publication on caregivers of adults versus children with epilepsy highlights a knowledge gap. How do you typically identify such gaps, ma'am? And what drives your research in addressing them?
We understood that the caregivers of both adult and children were having a different approach. When we were giving them the news or when we were discussing about their epilepsy, they had a very different feedback, and the way they were handling their relatives or their children were totally different. The response was also varying. Especially if you look into the medication adherence part, children, since they are being taken care by their parents, they always make sure the child is getting the medicine during appropriate timing. But for the adult person, it's like they are expected to take their own medication. So the caregivers may not even know whether they have taken the medicine or they have missed any medication. So the attachment and being with the patient all the time made a big difference. So if you look into our study, we have mentioned about identification of the seizures, just to mention. So it's like if a patient is getting a GTCS, it's a big event and so people notice it frequently. But there are focal seizures which are very minute and subtle one. It can be a small facial jerking or it can be something like a behavioral arrest where you get stuck. So these events were not identified much in adult patients, but for children, the parents made sure that they had the correct counting of how many seizures they had per day. So this itself, the close attachment, being with the patient, the what to tell, the mental state of a parent of a child versus mental state of a parent of an adult patient. There was a huge gap. So after doing this research, we didn't expect this to be such a big gap, but we had our own explanations to support the findings we had. So we were able to convey or teach the caregivers according to their drawbacks, and we have implemented our own changes after doing this particular research.
pretty informative, ma'am. Ma'am, we had found out one interesting case report from your publication, that is the anemia beating, an interesting cause of anemia during warfarin therapy. Ma'am, please share the key findings of that report, ma'am.
Yeah, first of all, I want to tell that that was a kind of coincidental finding because the patient came to our hospital for physiotherapy. She had undergone treatment for stroke elsewhere, and she came here because she was not satisfied and she wanted to improve much better. So the only purpose for her admission was physiotherapy. But during my patient visit, that is when I used to go for pre-rounds, I'll have some mild communication telling them, okay, this is what we are planning for you, this is a physiotherapy, and within this particular time period, you'll be able to walk yourself. So while communicating this part, we also identified that she was having anemia and she had some difficulty in doing physio. And when I went for pre-rounds, that elderly lady was trying to tell me that she was having some leg pain, which was causing some interference in the physiotherapy. So when I started looking for the reason of leg pain, we understood that she was having a mild swelling in her right leg, and that's how we found about this pseudoaneurysm. And when we went into detailed evaluation of that particular swelling, we proposed a theory, okay, maybe this might be causing the anemia. All the blood is getting oozed into that particular aneurysmal area. That could be the cause for anemia. So with this hypothesis, we went and we did a surgical correction for that aneurysm, and after which the patient had no further drop in her HB. So how we landed up in this case report? Only because I could spend some time with the patient, and patient gave me a detail of this particular leg pain, which resulted in finding this swelling, and then we evaluated and we found out this aneurysm. So it was a very minute thing, and since the patient was on an anticoagulation, she had this particular bleeding episode. If not for spending that time with patient, we would have really missed it. We would have treated that patient like any other anemic case, even though we didn't know what was happening. So again, coming back to patient communication and being more clinical helped me get this particular case report. This was my first case report as the main author, and thanks to my doctor for supporting me to be with the patient, to interact with them, to get the detail, and he helped me publish this particular case report too.
The way you empathize the patient was really amazing, ma'am. Ma'am, can you share any strategies for effective translating research findings into practical solutions for patient care?
Okay, so for that, basically what you have to do is when you start a research, make sure you have a question which is relevant in the clinical setting. So you should not be taking some study just for a publication or just to complete your thesis. Identify what is the issue in this particular area. If you are choosing a specialty, go and talk to the consultant in that area so that they'll have some difficulty while taking care of the patient. They'll have a question to be answered. If you choose that particular question, for example, you see the current issue with antibiotics, the growing resistance pattern. In that itself, they have multiple issues to be looked into. So if you are taking a particular organism, and if you see this particular organism is developing resistance very fast, so you can identify or you can look into what are the risk factors which is causing this issue. So knowing what is the current problem and making a research question out of that current issue and then doing a study will help you find an answer which can be clinically implemented. So instead of taking some random topic, if you choose a research which will be helpful for a clinical practice, that's going to be easy for you because automatically your results will be utilized in the clinical situation, and that's how you can take the research into a clinical implementation status.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll definitely try to inculcate all the strategies you shared with us in our practical approach also. Ma'am, as you reflect on your research journey, what are some areas you are particularly interested in exploring further, ma'am, in future?
You mean the research work or is it the clinical area which you're asking?
Research journey, ma'am. Research work.
Research, okay. So my focus is mainly on epilepsy, stroke, and neuroimmunology. We started with medication adherence in epilepsy patients, and we understood what are the factors affecting the medication adherence. So we have been tackling those aspects in our patients, and the caregivers have been given counseling accordingly. So next area which I am exploring is medication adherence in stroke. We have our own patients who are coming back with a recurrent stroke just because they are stopping medicine. Even though I am counseling and sending them home telling if you stop the medication you'll get a recurrent stroke, they have the confidence to stop it and they come back with another stroke. So I really want to know what is making them stop the medication. After all, the medicines which we give, especially the aspirin, is a very small tablet, so it's not even going to bother them much. But I even thought about the color, which is red in color. So is the color something causing a negative impact in them? So I am looking into all these aspects, and the research is going on. Likewise, in neuroimmunology, I would like to explore more, but it's not an area where we have definitive answers for all the conditions. So in future, I'll try to find out answers for some questions which I'm having difficulty at this moment.
Thank you, ma'am. How do you navigate the complexities of securing funding and resources for your research endeavors, ma'am?
Right now, we are not doing any research which requires a huge amount of fund. So we are not looked into that part. We are starting with minute issues, the minor areas which need to be rectified. Like I mentioned, the medication adherence. So mostly we are trying to see the behavioral aspect of our patient and how to make a change in that, and how to improve the patient care, not just from our side, but by improving the caregiver's knowledge or the patient's knowledge. We are just trying to improve their behavior so that they can have a better outcome of their disease. So right now we have not looked into any research which requires a funding.
And here we are into the another fascinating segment, that's emerging engagement in science, collaboration and community. My first question in this segment is in what ways do you believe engaging with the community enhance scientific endeavors and promotes understanding?
Yeah, it's like we are seeing only a very small proportion of patients inside the hospital. So if you get into the community, you'll get to know the real issues. So working with the community is always going to be beneficial because they'll have much more broader issues to be sorted out. And that's going to be an amazing area. Like we used to conduct camps where we go into the remote areas of Tamil Nadu, and there we have an entirely different set of people with a different set of issues too. So the accessibility to the hospital, coming and reporting their problems, even the access to the medications, all these are going to be a big issue for them. So just tackling these issues, we need to know this is an issue for those people, right? So getting into the community will give us a better picture of what is the actual problem in our population. So of course, more than sitting in a hospital and doing some work, getting out and being with the people inside the community is going to give you more opportunity for research works.
Thank you, ma'am. Now let's move into the closing segment of our discussion. As an end of the session, we conclude this conversation. What final thought or message would you like to leave with our audience, and especially aspiring researchers and healthcare professionals?
First of all, for research, make sure that you are not taking some topic for a publication or completion of your work. That's the main point I want to tell you people. Find a question which needs an answer. Make it into a research question. Focus on something specific. Don't take a whole thing and don't try to collect too many data and you're not able to analyze it and produce a meaningful output. Instead, take one issue, focus on that issue, collect the data regarding what is happening, and how other factors are affecting this particular issue. So, if you have a focused question, and basically that question should be something clinically relevant or something which you really need an answer for. This selection of question in the research will help you a lot, so that you'll get a good outcome. You'll be able to implement it in your practice, and that will of course bring a change in your community or the area you're practicing. And second thing, in your career, if you are choosing clinical side, please make sure that you spend time with your patient. Patient communication and building good rapport with the patient is going to be the main idea of clinical pharmacy practice. Okay, so if not, better not to practice or better not to do clinical pharmacist work. That will be the main advice from my side. Just seeing papers and seeing medications alone won't be enough unless you take it to the patient and let them know what is happening. Your work will not be recognized. Okay.
Thank you for providing such insights, ma'am. So, from the audience side, any questions you can put in the chat box.
One question, it's like, what are the extra skills a student required to get into clinical research after PharmD? Okay, you can start reading about clinical research, knowing what are the types of studies and how to get into the research field. Basically, you should have some knowledge about the study designs and the statistical workup you need to do, and how to choose a question, how to create a hypothesis, and how to plan a proposal. And in case if you're planning for a big study, how to look for funding and how to gather people for your study. Always it's going to be a teamwork. So these aspects can be looked into, and once if you don't know which area to look into, you better have discussion with multiple people in that specialized area. And once you select a specialty, make sure you have a good discussion with the person who is actively working in that field. So he'll be able to guide you regarding what research question or what hypothesis you need to create. So your research will have a meaningful ending.
There is another question, ma'am. So, ma'am, how do you manage both family and career life? That's so personal, but
it's very personal and it's very tough. It all depends on how good you are. So timing will not be the major thing. If you're smart enough to balance both, it will be okay. It all depends on your interest. So if you want to get out of your work by 5 o'clock, then fine. But if you would like to stay extra time, then of course you'll find time for your family too. It's all in your hands. It's okay. Suggestions for patient counseling. Yeah, first of all, introduce yourself. Make sure that the patient understands who you are. If you just go stand in front of them and start telling something blah blah blah, they'll be like, "Who the hell are you telling all this nonsense to me?" So make sure that you introduce yourself so that they know you are authorized to talk about their medication, and also they'll feel more confident listening to you. So when you start, make sure you know the patient's diagnosis and all the complaints, because one medication may have multiple indications. So for example, seeing propranolol, please don't assume that the patient is being treated for hypertension. They may not have a hypertension diagnosis, and the propranolol may be going for a headache or some tremors, or maybe the patient is having some thyroid related tremor issues. So unless you know the diagnosis, your patient counseling is going to be a big failure. So know the patient, understand the diagnosis, go through the medication, prepare yourself, introduce yourself to the patient, and then start the counseling. Go slow, start slow, go slow. Just tell them about their disease initially. With disease counseling, continue the drug counseling too. Okay, that will help you get to the patient. And if you are calm, then the patient will also stay calm, and your confidence will talk everything about you, and then the patient will also feel more trustworthy. Okay. What exactly is different between clinical pharmacy and clinical pharmacy and pharmacotherapy? It's actually pharmacotherapy is utilized in clinical pharmacy service. That's the difference. That's all. So you should have good knowledge about pharmacotherapy so that you can provide better clinical pharmacy services. What subjects are more important in real PharmD life as a part of job? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that question means. What subjects are most important in real PharmD life as a part of job? As a part of job, I guess. So of course, whatever you're studying in PharmD, all the subjects are essential. You have to learn well about the kinetics, dynamics, clinical research, epidemiology, pharmacotherapeuticology, everything matters, including cognosy, it matters because these are all basics. And when you start practicing, you will understand all this basic knowledge is helping you to understand the medication and take it to the patient side. I guess you're
So
not
that's all.
asking out of the sub. I mean, sorry. I think she's not asking anything out of the curriculum. If that is what you meant, of course, you need to develop your own skills of communication. Maybe that would be something I would suggest. Other than the subjects, we should have some skill to survive. Communication part, surviving in a hospital environment, working as a team, all these skills need to be developed other than the theoretical knowledge that you have. I think that should be sufficient. I think we are running out of time.
Yeah, ma'am. That's all from, I think, all the questions from audience side. That's all I think so. So, and let's end the session with a small note of thanks or thank you note, ma'am. I wanted to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence in the series. Your insights and expertise really captivated our audience, and the depth of the knowledge you shared as both enlightening and inspiring. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your all expertise with us, ma'am. And I'm immensely thankful to the Dr. Ajit Singh Sir and Innovation and Ideation Club for conducting such insightful series. Finally, thanking all the participants for your presence here. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing such insightful journey with us and really inspiring, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting me to the session. Once I cleared my BCPS exam, Dr. Ajit Singh, he is the one who initially called me for a session, and this is my second speaker session with him. Thank you, sir, for considering me for this program. Thank you for coordinating this event, and it was a wonderful experience spending time with your people. Hopefully, I have conveyed the necessary points you required and try to implement it in your practice. And all the students, make sure that you study well and understand your subjects so that you'll have a better career. Okay? Utilize your internship. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's really amazing day.
Okay, then we'll wind the session. Thank you so much.